Never know. Okay, good morning, Rabbi Isai.
Good morning.
Good morning. We will continue where we left off last time. There were some questions, and we said we will pick up next time. Last time we discussed the Sfas Machteres. We discussed the underground language that the Chassidim used in communist Russia to be able to communicate and run the Moisdes and run the Babrish and run everything, which was illegal. So they had to have a Sfas Machteres. They had to have underground code languages. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about how the Russians or how the communists drove Yiddishkeit out. And it's interesting. And we'll see how much of that we can accomplish today. And if not, we'll continue next time in Beit Hashem. So when we look at the communists, when we look at Russia, we have to divide it to two tkufas. We have to divide it pre-Stalin and post-Stalin. What does it mean pre-Stalin and post-Stalin? Stalin rose to communism. The communist revolution happened in 1917 in Tafresh Ayin Zayin, about Tafresh Ayin Ches. And then the first 10, 12 years till Tafresh Sadik 1930, we're going to lump that together. We're going to call that pre-Stalin. From Tafresh Sadik, from 1930, that's already post-Stalin, not post-Stalin, the era of Stalin. And it was two very, very different things. Now, before we get into that, one last thing, even though Stalin rose to power a little earlier, Lenin died already in 1926, 1927, around then. But when Stalin took over, he was not really the dictator or the sole dictator. It took him a few years to really solidify that. For the first couple of years, he still was just one of the heads, and he ran things together with people, and slowly, he removed people, he killed people, and he slowly took him a couple of years to gain his grip on power. So whenever we talk about what they did in Russia, I don't want to say this because it sounds bad, the rhyme or reason that they had, or by what laws they abided, they ruled, and what hashkafas they did things by, that it, I don't want to say it makes sense from that perspective, but it does to an extent. That's all pre-Stalin. From when Stalin came in 1930, there was no rhyme, there was no reason. He was a dictator, he was a brutal dictator, he did whatever he wanted. He didn't follow any communist hashkafa. He didn't follow anything, he just did what he wanted. Killed 50 million people, did whatever rules he wanted. He did like Gaddafi in Libya, just didn't follow anything, just did whatever he wanted. So when we're going to be talking about, right now, we are going to narrow the era down to only the first 10 years of communism. We talk about what the Russians did. In that time, Gufa, now, communism during that time was not, in a sense, we can be medamid to religion in a way. What does that mean? I want to put it. It was not a dictatorship. That means in communism, Gufa, there were a lot of different shittas and different approaches, and everybody had a say, and everything went by a vote. There was not one person that ruled. There was a group of 7 people that ruled, and they had more or less equal power, and they followed votes. Nobody was a balabas of the other. You had to be a communist. That was the only, meaning they banned all other parties, and they banned all other hashkafas, they banned everything else. But within communism, it was not a dictatorship at all. Everybody had a say. In the Communist Party had different sections. There was the section, which was the Hebreiska section. There was the Yiddish part. There was a lot of different parts that everybody had a say. Everybody had equal rights. Everybody had equal votes. And it ran in a pretty nice way, actually, in a certain way. I don't want to sound like I'm giving them sounding good here, but there were certain things that ran. Once Stalin came in 1930, there's no more, the Yevsekti was over, which was, Yevsekti was short from Hebreiska section, the Jewish section of the Communist Party, and there were other parties, and there was a Bundestag, and there was it, and there was that. It was over. He just became a Moshe B'Kippur. So we're going to focus now on this era. And they had a very, very big goal of driving Yiddishkeit out. How did they do it? So there's three things that we need to follow, and we are going to follow one of them today, and maybe if you have time to go into the second one. The ones that we're going to follow is, one of them is that they used legal measures. They never pushed Yiddishkeit out, but in a very, very passive, aggressive way, they passed laws that indirectly affected Yiddishkeit. That's one thing that we have to follow, how that developed over years. Another thing that's very important to follow is the interpretation of the law. Since these were very, very new laws, and it wasn't like the American thing that's 200 years old, so the courts already defined every law and interpreted every law. The laws were somewhat vague and somewhat not clear, and it was a very, very decentralized government that every single area had their own interpretation and to what extent they were going to be enforcing the laws. That's another thing that we have to follow. Just use an example. I don't want to get carried away. Use an example. If you went, like during World War II, when he ran away, the Flunid went to Tashkent, Uzbekistan, all those places, Samarkand, Tashkent, those places, they had a much, much easier version and a lot less, even before already sent him to Georgia. Even before already they sent him to Georgia, before the war. Because in Georgia, they interpreted it and enforced it to a lot of a lesser degree. So that's another thing we have to follow. And that was even, not just that they went to other countries, even within Mother Russia itself, there was differences. The Friedrich Rebbe, after he was freed from Russia, he left Leningrad. Why did he leave Leningrad? Because in Leningrad, he was a bad guy, what he was doing, the way they interpreted it and the way they did it. But they found this place outside of Moscow, Malachivkir, which wasn't that way. So it was a better place to live. You can live there better. So we have here so far the legal, we have here the interpretation of the legal that has to be addressed, and we also have the extra legal. Besides that, there was a lot of extra legal things. There was a lot of propaganda going on. Tremendous propaganda going on. There was also, you got good jobs, you were communist. Communist meant you believe in communist thing, or at least like communist. So therefore, you couldn't keep any Torah mitzvahs, you couldn't do anything if you wanted to get a good job, if you wanted to be in university, if you wanted to be in anything. See, it's legal to be from here if you want, you're not going to get a job, you're not going to be thrown out of university, you're not going to get any money for research, you're not going to do anything. And so that's extra legal, if we can say. So all these things have to be addressed. And today I want to set a goal of addressing the legal part and follow that. So the first thing we want to talk about is how they drive out Torah mitzvahs legally through a very, very passive aggressive way. One last point I want to mention, being that the interpretation of the legalities was a big part of it, the Friedrich Rebbe set up in Moscow an office, top lawyers that he hired, and their job was to help people in the cities push back whenever they were slapped down with fines or things. That was their interpretation of the local interpretation. Friedrich Rebbe had a very, very active office in Moscow. I don't remember where it was. Top lawyers that used to raise money to keep that office alive. Where their job was to help the right legal opinions of what's takemutter, what's takeasser, and so on and so forth. We'll talk about that when we get to interpretation of legal. What the Friedrich Rebbe had going was is Marvel and all the different things he had going on. So we're going to talk about the legal a little bit, and I want to discuss certain mitzvahs of how they drove them out. So we're going to start to one of them. One of them was very, very simple. One was Mikrois. The way they closed Mikrois down was that they just got inspectors, health inspectors to come to Mikrois. Mikrois today are not that healthy. Mikrois then what they should be. And they went after the Mikrois with health inspectors. There's even a famous story about Chodaita, Sheikh Chodaita's father. And he was in, I forgot which city he lived, and they came in to close the mikveh on the grounds that it's not a healthy mikveh. And it was no chlorine, there was nothing in the water. It was Taka Visudan design. Karheiz was Sheikh Chodaita, Sheikh's father. He lived in different cities. I don't know which city it happened. And they came to close the mikveh down just to protest and show how healthy it is. That he took a cup and he filled up some black water and he made a big shacham and drank it to show that it's healthy, it's good, it's survivable, whatever it is. It was nefesh. So mikvahs was very, very simple. To go on the other end, he never did anything to stop shechita. Shechita just fell apart by itself because it was shechita all along. It just fell apart because lack of interest. Mila, they never did anything to stop in the legal. Right? They had money, that's a funny thing. It's also related. The year after I got married, so I got married. So Shmini Atzeres, I went to Talucha. So the year after I got married, whatever, it's state I went to Talucha with my shvager. And came back 10 nights after, and the 8th time, my wife's grandfather, his father, Yudel Chitzik was there, but he was already a little hard of hearing. So my shvager was telling me that you have to make kiddush on mashke. At night. Shmini Atzeres at night. My shvager, Yudel Chitzik. My shvager was telling me to make kiddush at night. So I stayed at night at mashke. I told my shvager, you don't make kiddush at night at mashke. Right day, you can make kiddush at mashke. At night, you make a wine. You don't make a mashke at night. We had a whole argument back and forth. So he said, we're going to ask the Elder Zayda what's the thing of Tadl Lubavitch. So I asked him, so he went to him, and he told him, Zayda, what's the thing of Kiddush at the State of Lubavitch? Zayda, what did you make Kiddush at the State of Lubavitch? And he was all hard of hearing already. So he said, ah? So he's screaming in his ear, he bombed in the whole house. Zayda, what's the thing about? So he said, Afchal, better get geld of Einzibram. What money? He's a shchita phased out, not only because of the laws and no interest, but also no money. Mila you could do. Again, people didn't do Mila because of the extra legals. You lose your job. You know, because of the extra legals, propaganda, and then you lose your job, you have to run a university because but legally they never touched Mila. So the easiest one was mikveh. Mikveh did in a very easy way. They just came and closed it down on health grounds. An interesting one was shuls. How did they do shuls? The way they did shuls, and this didn't happen right away. It took time to develop these things. This happened. What did they do about the shuls? How did they go about it? Communism, part of the communism is that there's no more private property. All the property, your apartment, the business, the shuls, everything goes to belong to the government. So now this shul doesn't belong to the Jewish community anymore. The shul belongs to the government. So the government came to the Jewish community and they said, listen, look what you guys have over here. You have 15 guys coming to shul in the morning if you're lucky. Whatever. I don't know what minimum was like back then. But it's not the way it is today. You have 15 guys. We have much better purposes for this building. This building doesn't belong to you. It belongs to all the Russian citizens. If we turn this into a youth club, we're going to pack this house with 500 guys tonight. So we just found better use. So they would tell them, oh, go bring us signatures. Go bring us signatures that you're going to have 500 people coming to the show. You bring us the signatures of 500 people coming to the show. There's a day to let you have the show. If not, we have 500 youth that are willing to come use the building tonight for whatever they want to use it for. So we're just going to put it to a better cause. So people are afraid to sign up because of the extra legals. You sign up and you lose your job or whatever it is. So in most cities, you couldn't come up with the signatures. And this time they were able to forge 500 signatures that they wanted to come here for a gymnasium, for gym classes, or whatever it is. And that's how they legally got rid of the shuls in a very, very disabled way. Listen, this doesn't belong to you anymore. It belongs to everybody. And we got to figure out what is the best use to put these buildings. In some cities, they managed to keep the shuls through that. They weren't afraid, and they got together and they put up the signatures that were needed. And they said, we want this building, and it's a better cause, and we have more people coming to shul. And then obviously they had a harder time taking away the shul in many cities. Because of that, they didn't take away the shul. What Mendy's mentioning is another thing that in the big cities they left the big shuls because they wanted to put up papichuts, that the Yiddishkeit is flourishing, and so on and so forth. So that is how they did shuls. Then they got more creative. This all took time. I'm not going through the timeline here. I'm not putting this, what years they came up with these cops. Another cop they came up with was They did Rabbanim. How did they get rid of Rabbanim? In Russia, you can't be a parasite. The only way you don't have anything. The only way you get anything, the only way you get a food voucher, you get an apartment, the apartment doesn't belong to you. The only way you're going to get an apartment is a what? If you work for the government. And you're not a parasite, you're a productive citizen, then you deserve it. Or student. Or students got it. Show the absurdity of how.
How do they get their population to buy that? The government,
That's why they lived off potato fields.
So first of all, if you want to talk about it, how it happened slowly through three stages, and they backtracked in the middle. It's called the, that's what Yiddish got actually flourished in. It's called the, NEP, whatever. We use it another time. Of how they went about their economic, how their economic plans developed. And now we're talking about their religious rules or lack of rules. So when they came to Rabbanim, they had a very simple thing.
what do you do? What is that?
No, so the only way you get an apartment is if you have a job. If you have no job, you don't get an apartment. A Rav is not one of the listed jobs. So you have a bunch of parasites, you're a parasite, social assassin, and you can't think so. Over Rabbanim were forced to leave their jobs if they wanted to survive. So this only happened later. The communists got better and better with time. Better and better. They got shrewder and shrewder with time. So they left the Rabbanim, then the Rabbanim got food vouchers, but they moved into the vibrations of shuls. They moved into the vibration, the Bleiben, just for our vibration. They lived in the shul. When they still had shuls, they took away shuls, took away vibration, and they squeezed the Rabbanim out in that way that you're not a productive thing. The only two things you could do is you could be a laborer or you could be a student. Interestingly enough, before they, took time to figure things out, the Chatchila, yeshivas, they were also students. So the first 2 years of communism in the yeshiva and stuff, students, as talmidim, as students, as college students, got free apartments and food. So they somehow moved yeshivas out from being universities. They somehow got it on a also university. And university is a very, very productive citizen if you're in a university. So that's the way they really squeezed the bottom out. We make a big thing that I'm late because the chief rabbi got criticized. It never really was. That was, he's the Rav that held out the last longest. So at some point he became the chief only. And he resigned. He was also squeezed out. He continued doing it unofficially. But Leivik started Dalit already, so he also resigned. He was forced out of being Rav. He couldn't do it anymore. So that's just an interesting thing of what they did, a law of how they smoked the Rabbanim. Okay, you gotta work. You gotta be a laborer, you're not a laborer. Another interesting thing is the most complex thing, which I can't even wrap my head around, because it was laws and rules, was the rule of school. The way they got the Chadarim out was, the way the Department of Education of what they did, and this is super, super complex. It's like if you don't understand it, you have to read like 50, 60 pages to properly understand it, which I did once, and then I don't have it clear anymore. They started with separation of church and state. It means the government of Russia, under the Tsar, they supported Chadarim. They gave money to every community, that you run your schools the way you want. So you got money and you open a cheder. You open a cheder that spoke Yiddish and taught Torah. They made the first thing they did was separation of church and state. They actually let culture, because you could open a Yiddish school, and they talk in Yiddish, we give you money to have a Yiddish school, but no religious instruction. That was one step they did. They gave money. Communist school, they spoke in Yiddish, but there was no problem. Later, they made a rule that you're not, okay, so maybe we'll go private schools. We'll open up Chadarim privately. We do it in America. So then they made a rule that there's no private schools. And what is a school? Anything more than 3 or 7 kids. It was a big, big fight in the thing. So they learned you could only open up a private school because it's very, very hard. How many kids could you have? 2 to 3 kids, or in some cities you can have 2 to 7 kids. That's the most you can have. That was another step. Okay, so many people, they didn't send the kids to school. And they kept them home with 3 kids, 7 kids, or kept them home homeschooled or whatever. Later, they passed the rule, no, you must go to school. So you don't go to school. You have to send them to the communist school, and then all you can do is after, you can do 3 kids as after school program. Later, Bechlal, they moved Shabbos to Sunday. Bechatchila, the day off for Rosh Hashanah Shabbos, so you'd be able to get around with work. And when they had to go to school, you went to communist school, you were able to keep Shabbos. Later, this wasn't specifically about schooling, but they moved the day of rest from Shabbos to Sunday, so they had to come to work. So it's very, very complex to understand because the rules of Chatarim, to get rid of Chatarim, the Department of Education kept passing new updated laws. Very, very complicated. This was the biggest fight the Friedman ever fought. That's what they were doing. They were fighting from 3 to 7. The Friedman put up a big fight, and it's not 3, it's 7. So that's how they got rid of Chatarim, was in the way of the Department of Education. Again, first it was separation for church and state. So some Chadarim had no money. Most Chadarim closed down. Even the people in the city staffers opened up private Chadarim. Eventually they said no private Chadarim, only after school programs, 3 to 7. People didn't send. You must send. And so on and so forth. I'm not even going through all the laws, but they're very, very complex. And that's how they got rid of Chadarim, which was really the biggest thing that the Friedman ever fought. The biggest problem for Yiddishkeit is that they cut off education. Yes?
How long is that period?
There's all a period of 12 years I'm talking about. Yeah. But it happened in stages. I'm not going through what happened when. So then in Tafresh, this I'm going to say, in Tafresh Peizayin, is where they came up with the most, not they came up with the most dangerous law. The law was in effect already for 7 years. But this law, the first time they used it, was in Tafresh Peizayin, right before the Friedman, 3 months before the Friedman, they started using it on Galachim. And they started using the law that you're not allowed to be a counter-revolutionary.
What?
Counter-revolutionary, which is a law that's hard to define. What happened was, here in America, the revolutionists go to jail, trying to throw over the government. But the Russians, it's counterintuitive, but the Russians, they were revolutionists till the end. Fidel Castro's revolutionists. We are a revolution. So the laws are not allowed to be, so there's no law in Russia you can't be a revolutionist. The law is you can't be a counter-revolutionist, means you're not allowed to fight the revolution. That law was from the day communism set up, from the day of the revolution. They had no, you can't fight the revolution, you can't be counter-revolutionist. But they never used it against the Yiddishkeit. Tafresh Peizayin, they somehow started enacting that law. That's what the Friedman was arrested on. What do? I never make it. I didn't, Chadarim I did illegal. I only did Chadarim 3 to 7. Shoals 1 and 2. There was nothing against shoals 1 and 2. He took away. The other people down to not say this. He never did nothing illegal stuff, but there was nothing illegal mamish. So then they started using, that was the worst thing because that was probably indefensible. When they started using that law, the law of your counter-revolutionary. So this is just a skira ktsara of how they use in a passive-aggressive ways the laws to drive out Yiddishkeit. Again, they never came to just did things without rhyme or reason. Again, I feel bad saying this, but even these laws are not rhyme or reason. Till for the first 10, 12 years, there was law, there was order, there was everything. And that's the way they operate. Again, next time, I'm invited back. We could talk about besides for driving it out through the laws, there was also the interpretation of the law, which we touched on. And then there was also, more importantly, the extra legal, which means the
Propaganda.
not just propaganda, not tavot, that you say the benefits that communists got, and not like all the problems of Britain, the people came when they went to do Britain in hiding, weren't regular Yidden. Those are the Yidden that were communists that had good jobs. They had to be in hiding. But David Shahid, who was not a communist, no problem doing the Brit. Zero issue. They didn't do it in hiding. The generals and the soldiers and the professors and good jobs, they had to come to the Bleivik's house to get married as they would send people on a meeting. They would give the babies away. I don't know what other ways around it was, but they would deposit the children and their grandparents for a year just to get a bris. These communists, they would get checked if they did it even if you were fake communists, it's against the law. That's, they would give their babies to their old brothers in the door for a couple of months, and then they would pick them up. It's basically one way around. But that's all goes into the extra legal of it. Shkoyach.
That's fine.
He was arrested.
Amazing how